Welcome to the Excellence Foresight podcast, the podcast where we explore what it means to lead with purpose, adapt with agility, and pursue excellence in everything we do. I'm your host, Nancy Noemi, and today's episode is about riding towards excellence with a special guest, Peter Barnett. Peter shares passion for continuous improvement and my interest in cycling. He's a dedicated cyclist and a passionate advocate of the Shingo model. He serves as the Director of Executive Education at the Shingo Institute, bringing deep expertise in lean thinking and leadership development. Peter, welcome to the Excellence Foresight podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Glad to be here.
Great. So now let's start with your cycling story, Peter. When did you first get into cycling, and what does the peloton mean to you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do like to talk about this topic. I actually started when I was 11 years old. I started racing BMX. And so I was doing the bicycle motocross thing for several years, and I loved it. But I've always had this kind of passion for bicycles and kind of the mechanical aspect of them and just the technology behind them, even as a little kid. So yeah, I started racing then, and I got into mountain biking and road biking when I was in college. I took a couple courses, and I was living in Utah, and there was beautiful places to ride. But this was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and mountain biking was just taking off, and road biking was pretty solid. So that's where I learned a little bit about the strategy behind road biking and cycling in general. And I learned a little bit about the Tour de France, and I watched that. It was a lot harder to watch back in those days, but you could follow it, and just starting to learn a little bit about some of the strategies and techniques, and how this peloton idea that you're going to really dive into. It was really for me this metaphor of trust, but yet independence, and how that kind of shared effort. It was so amazing to me the first time I went on a road bike ride with a good group, and we had a paceline going, and I was going 5 miles an hour faster than I normally rode by myself. And it just amazed me. My effort level was lower, but actually my output was much higher. So as I could see real early on that there was something pretty interesting to this group ride kind of opportunity with the road biking that brought a little difference than what I was used to in my mountain biking and BMX skills.
Excellent, Peter. I think we're going to learn a lot from your experience in biking, and you started to allude a little bit to lower performance, maybe to compared to higher performers, and how the cycling transformed that. I have two cyclists at home. My son, we do hope that he's going to become a professional cyclist soon. I also been learning a lot myself. So, but if I want to go back a little bit to your experience, and how did this experience shape how you view leadership or excellence in your professional life? How can you link the cycling peloton to what you are currently doing at the Shingo Institute?
A few years ago, early 2000s, I was paying attention a lot to cycling, road cycling, and the Tour de France in particular. And I was fascinated by Team Sky. They had this new coach they had brought in, Dave Brailsford. Chris Froome was the guy back in the day, and British cycling hadn't won anything big, anything at all, really, in like 100 years, forever. They just weren't a very strong cycling force at all. And didn't look like it was going to change. They bring in Dave Brailsford, and I don't know if you've heard much about him, but he has this philosophy of really trying to break things down into small increments, and improving them by 1%, you get a significant increase in the overall output. So that they're really simple but effective philosophy of how you drive performance improvement through increasing and focusing on small marginal gains. It really is, I think, the what I would apply as my leadership style and how I like to see organizations improve. Many organizations want to do this one big bang initiative, drive all kinds of huge value all at once, and then move on back to the way they were working before. But as Dave showed with that team back in the early 2000s with Team Sky, it's those marginal gains. It says you focus on getting a little bit better every day at everything you do, and then stepping back and reflecting again, and then going again to try to get a little bit better, and not just focusing on one aspect of your business or your cycling team allows you to really achieve the best success.
Exactly. And I think we focus sometimes on those big campaigns and doing one thing at a time and focusing on one initiative or another. And then we lose sometimes sight of what's the most important, which is keep moving forward. And that's the the small continuous improvements which are going to take us there. So, Peter, the cycling peloton is a very powerful metaphor, and we see more and more articles around it. It's all about alignment, shared purpose, and trust. And we see the teams, how do they really play well together, trying to get their leader up on the podium. So, how do you see this reflected in the Shingo model itself? We teach continuous improvement process in the Shingo model. How do you see it reflected there?
Yeah, great question. I was going on with that same discussion around the Team Sky. One of the Shingo guiding principles is seek perfection. And it's not perfectionism, but it's rather never being satisfied with the status quo and constantly being willing to experiment and learn and try new things. So that applies to cycling just as well as it applies to businesses. You know, this idea that we can get a little bit better, but we're willing to test and learn and sometimes fail. In fact, if you're not failing, you're probably not really running tests, because great tests will always push the envelopes of what's possible out into areas which we're not sure, and that's really healthy for an organization. Obviously, it's healthy for learning how to get better at cycling. When British cycling team went from that 0 wins, 100 years ago, to winning almost 60, I believe, or so in that early 2000s, that 10-year period there, they did it by not just one big campaign or one big focus, trying harder, big slogans. They didn't do any of that. What they did was they focused on tires, and they got lighter tires, and they focused on seats, because they found that the seats were important, not just because of the weight of the seat, but also because of the way it ergonomically helped the cyclist. So it's getting beyond just maybe driving on the bike itself, but how did it interact with the person? They started looking at what they're wearing. They started wearing the kind of crazy skin suits. They were lighter, cooler, and more effective than the traditional suits they had been wearing. So I think the other thing that always kind of impressed me about what they did was they were constantly measuring and monitoring the weakest points and improving those. And so you take that analogy to what we would want to do as a organization. We would be constantly looking for our weakest points, measuring and monitoring them, and driving improvement in incremental ways. And they focused on things that you wouldn't expect. They focused on things like bringing their pillows with them as they traveled, so that they would have a more comfortable night's sleep. It's much like organizations. Sometimes we can be so focused on reducing the cycle time in production or driving cost out of our supply chain, when in reality, things like improving our culture, building trust, can have a much bigger impact because it transcends so many of the other aspects of what we do. So those principles that we saw there are really the same principles. You could see them coming alive in just different ways in those two organizations.
And this is amazing. Going from winning 0 races to winning like 60, that's really a great transformation. Yeah. And I think it's a great story. And I think, Peter, you mentioned a little bit performance. We often in organization focus on the rising stars, right? Those will be the people who take the attention of their managers. They are the one promoted, and they take the scene everywhere they go. So in the cycling peloton, where do you see respect of every individual more reflected in the balance between the individual performance and the team dynamics?
Yeah, the way you win the Tour de France is you have the rider with the shortest time over the 21 days at the end of the race, and that dynamic is kind of, to your point, loses that there's many riders, 8 to 10 plus riders in that team, and there's so much work that those riders are doing that allowed that one rider to get across the line first. So you'll notice whenever you watch the end of a race with the Tour de France, and whoever comes across is often going back to celebrate with their team members, because they know that the reason they were in a position to go across the line first is because they had domestiques bringing them water and protecting them in the peloton, and leading their way, and basically making it much easier for them to ride, so they could save their energy till the last minute to win, because it's the team that ultimately wants to win. And there is a rider that goes across first, and often there's heroic efforts that they bring to the table, but they're part of a broader team. And I think that when you think of how that works in organizations, there is a big downside of focusing on just those, star performers, and not having strong teams to support the entire organization. And I think that's just something that's it's an easy thing for managers to do. We tend to spend our energy as management, focusing on two groups of people. Those high performers, they're fun to work with, and they're stretching and doing all that. And then we work with our very, very poor performers. We're putting them on improvement plans. And so the bulk of our organization, the 80% that sits in the middle, often is, I wouldn't say completely ignored, but doesn't get the focus of those other two groups, at the peril or demise or kind of reducing of the effectiveness of the entire organization. So I think that's an important piece as we think about respecting every individual. It applies to not just our top performers, not our bottom performers, but to everyone in the organization, because we recognize that as we start, especially in this new world we're moving towards, teams are becoming much more autonomous because our communication systems, technology is allowing us to have much flatter organizations. Those flatter teams have to have information at their fingertips. They have to be able to act on information. They have to be able to have accurate information. Much of our traditional management system is designed around cascade of information and strategy, and it's probably designed in the most inefficient way possible. And then we're trying to then operate in more modern worlds where we can have everybody in the organization know exactly what happened in that strategy meeting immediately, in real time if we wanted to, but immediately after it happens. So everyone could have that information, whereas in the past we would have to share that through a cascaded train. It would dilute and lose some of its information and impact as it went through. So as I think about how we need to transform organizations in the future, there's so much we can learn about how, like a cycling team, for instance, has to be able to communicate. When they're talking on their little speaker, the entire team hears everything that's being said right there real time. So if I'm a rider in the back of the pack and I hear my potential race leader had a problem, I'm slowing down immediately. Nobody had to tell me to slow down. I just heard the information. I understood the plan and the strategy. I knew who was going to be our person we wanted to get at the front that day. They had a problem. I'm going to sacrifice myself to get back to help pull them back into the main peloton again. So it's just that dynamic of how are we going to start shifting our organizations in a way that kind of supports this.
You used the key word here, to sacrifice themselves, and this is pretty true. I mean, everybody works towards having the leader on the podium. Their team wins. Sometimes we hear their names, right, on the race, but they're not really very well known. But all of them are really doing everything they can toward that win. And the Tour de France is really crazy. I think crazy atmosphere, what you see there, and the competition you see. But all of them, I think they understand the strategy. They know how to move forward towards that same direction. I think that makes really a big difference. And Peter, you alluded to the new technology I think they're using now to communicate, and the easiness of passing on this information, which is very key, I think, to the success of the teams. Now we see more technology integration in what they're doing, and I think we can learn a lot also from that. So just going back to the Shingo model a little bit and the principles, and how can you share an example where a culture of excellence truly mirrored that of high functioning peloton in the work you do with organizations and the companies you implement the Shingo model with?
Yeah. So, it's a common hallmark of every great team. So one of the cool opportunities I get as being associated with the Shingo Institute is we get the opportunity to go visit organizations that feel they've reached a level of, maturity in their organizational transformation. They then say, hey, we want to reward our organization, challenging for the Shingo prize, and hopefully be a recipient of that prize as something that they can do to celebrate with their organization. So we get the opportunity to meet these organizations, to really see what's going on under the covers, behind the curtains, and really get a feel for what helps to drive it. And when you think about the cultural enablers, continuous improvement dimensions of the model, you see leaders that focus on enabling rather than directing. They create conditions. We often call it conditions for flow, where there's clear purpose, trust, shared accountability, where the results can be remarkable. But that idea of flow, one of the beauties of it is when there's interruptions to flow, they become very obvious. That helps those organizations respond much faster, and that speed and response reduces backflows and improves their ability to continue to recover and move forward quickly. And so it doesn't matter whether that's a production issue, a cultural issue, a strategic, market decision. Organizations that are able to create those kind of high functioning teams are going to be better off no matter what. And we see that show up in those are the type of organizations that then win the Shingo Prize.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing, some of the winners on stage, and you could see really that how proud they are of what they've been achieving. And I think the fact that they are a good functioning team together helps them really get there. So, Peter, how do you help leaders shift from command and control thinking to one that fosters flow, collaboration, and shared purpose? So you shared an example about the teams in the organization. Where the role of the leader is in all this?
It's tough because we have leaders that are rewarded, often chosen, because of a certain set of skill sets. So you can see, you can think about, they're super intelligent. They come from the best school. They're very articulate in their ability to speak,
Yeah.
with a command of the language and the influence others. They have all these kind of things. They can be very, a strong presence, in meetings, and they carry themselves well. So we have all these characteristics that often are what we hire leaders for. But when we step back and we think about, leaders but the type of leader that we want going forward, we often realize that those characteristics that we kind of value when we bring in a leader aren't often the characteristics that are going to help them be successful in an organization that's trying to drive more leading with humility, respecting every individual, kind of going away, as you said, from that command and control to more of a kind of a flow collaboration environment. So you have to start thinking about different characteristics of leaders. And we don't often think of, I want to go, put the top characteristics in this search for I've been involved in some searches for CEOs for organizations. I haven't seen, the really super effective coach show up on that list yet, even though we push them and try to get them. You don't see, they're so incredibly humble. They never take credit for anything. You don't see that show up on those lists. They're awesome listeners. That's what, you just don't see those things. But yet we know from all the experience we've had that those are characteristics that are going to create the type of environments that are going to be most effective. So there's a lot of shifting that has to happen. It's not just the individuals, it's often the system that brings those kind of individuals in as their leaders.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I just had an example last year where I saw big disconnect or gaps between the hiring process, what we look at in individuals, and what is going to serve finally the organization, because we don't look at the right skills. We don't look at the people and the person, whether he fits in that culture or what is he going to bring. We're just looking at competencies sometimes, but that doesn't necessarily get us to the right result. And I think, Peter, having a culture within the organization depends on the systems, right? We teach this in the Shingo model. We say systems will drive ideal behavior. And if the systems are not well designed, we're going to always have gaps and alignment in the organization. And you mentioned continuous improvement, those small improvements. When we look at organization, we should look at improvement in every department, in every system, not just focus on one area and forget the others. In your experience, what's the toughest part of creating or sustaining a culture of excellence, either in an organization or even in a cycling team, if you want to go back to that?
Yeah.
Which area you think is the hardest really to impact and change?
That's a good question. And it's I'll give you a general answer across the board, but before that, I think it depends. And one of the things that I've seen, there's a joke from I don't know, one of those kind of classic bar jokes, where the priest comes into the bar and the bartender, he's talking to some folks. The bartender asks him, "So, all right, I got a tough question for you. What's the most difficult commandment?" And the priest thinks about it for a while and says, "Oh, it's the commandment that you're struggling the most to live." And so you think about that with an organization, what's the most important thing you should focus on, or what's the principle you need to be thinking about the most, or the system you need to drive? It's the system that you're struggling with the most. And that may be different for different organizations, but common themes I see in this space is that constancy of purpose. And we were kind of leading towards that. That's a Deming phrase, but it really gets back to this relentless pursuit towards a goal and a focus on satisfying customers and just not letting any other distractions get in the way, the new shiny object over here, the potential market out there, whatever it is that could distract us from that targeted, focused goal. So we talk about how continuous improvement is constantly driving improvement. A lot of organizations will look for the shiny transformation object. And so it was TQM, and then it was going to be Six Sigma, and then it was going to be Lean, and then it was going to be Lean Six Sigma, and then it was going to be Shingo, and then it's going to be whoever knows, it's going to do Agile next. And they're constantly looking for a new transformation framework to help them do something that they're just not doing. And it's not the framework that's the problem. And so I think that's part of the dynamic is constancy of purpose in that kind of relentless consistency, driving towards sustaining it. And especially when the pressure comes on, I find that it's when they're pretty good, and then we miss a quarter and they're getting some pressure from the board, and they revert right back to their old ways of working. And it's that what do you do, not when things are going okay, but when the pressure's on, how do you respond? And are you able to continue to live into those principles, or do you abandon them and go back to your old ways of working? It's a big challenge.
Yeah, that's a great, I think, angle. And what I see frequently, and also in the Middle East where I work, is that there's a lot of frequent changes in leaders, which that also every leader brings his own perspective, his own agenda, and then you lose all what you've been building prior to that. So there's a lot of changes which impacts people, not necessarily they have to go through it, but they just have to live with it.
It gets back to that what we were talking about earlier is that we hire leaders, and we sometimes even give them incentives that drive the wrong behaviors. Exactly. So we hire leaders, and I can't tell you how many times it blew me away the first time I heard it, then I heard it again and again, where organizations that challenged and won the Shingo Prize and had created a really great culture and system and thing, and they got a new leader, and that new leader said, we're dropping the Shingo thing, we're doing something else because I want my program. I want my thing. I got to have my signature delivery because that's what they're expecting from me. The reason they brought me in was to do something different. And I think that's a paradigm we need to shift a lot when we think about how we whether we're bringing leaders up in an organization or we're externally bringing leaders in, is oftentimes our expectations aren't, we want you to take what we have, we want you to help us build that in a new market. That would be a building of our culture. Instead, what they often do is they look for ways to then, and they end up doing the simple thing, which is let's just change the framework of our program. And unfortunately, by the time we find out that that's really essentially destroyed much of what we built, that leader's already moved on. So it's this unfortunate cycle.
It's a cycle.
That I think if organizations can think about, they might be able to start breaking that. And you have to be very conscious about it.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of disruption that not necessarily needs to be there, and it destroys rather than really builds continue what has been started earlier. And for me, I call it also the syndrome of the new CEOs, where they feel the need to do things differently, which they didn't. It's a continuation. I think I was in one of the Shingo workshops where I understood that continue the good things rather than just eliminate and start fresh is very important for people, for the continuity, for the constancy of purpose. But unfortunately, it's not done.
Yep.
So, and that brings certain resistance to change sometimes also in organization. As in cycling, there are the headwinds, and I think the team moves based on that. Burnouts, lack of alignment, all of these exist in organization. So what's your approach to navigating these, and what have you learned during your cycling journey?
Yeah. So Shingo principle, but you also see this show up just like with Dave Brailsford and the British cycling example we used earlier. But the thinking that results come from behaviors, ideal behaviors, meaning the best of the behaviors will deliver the best or ideal results, which are rooted in principles. We've been talking about a lot of them today, respecting every individual, leading with humility, focusing on process, thinking systemically. All those are principles that you can then align behaviors to, which will drive results. Outcomes happen, and those best outcomes happen that way. So I think of things like that when I'm contemplating how to help organizations, because burnout and stress are very common. One of the things that I encourage leaders to do in this space is to approach those feelings of resistance, I guess, with empathy, but with curiosity. Be curious about what's going on. Not it's easy to brush them aside. Oh, it'll get better. Don't worry about it. Just suck it up. Yeah, it happened to me too. I got through it. You'll be okay. All those kind of things. But really be empathetic to their feeling. Tell me how you're feeling, and really try to understand, because oftentimes there's systemic issues that are going on that you can address. And then you can break problems down into a small, more manageable chunk that makes them less overwhelming. That can also be, great leaders are able to do that. Great leaders also give people the freedom to fail. And that freedom to fail can take huge burdens off of people. They normally don't really believe it, but many great leaders will point back to an experience in their life. I had one myself. Made a purchasing blunder, and it cost my organization $150,000. Back in the early 90s, that was a lot of money. So it cost $150,000. I thought for sure I was going to be fired for this. It had to do with kind of missed some things in a contract. Thought I was going to be fired for sure. And I remember my boss saying, "Why would I fire you? I just paid $150,000 for you to learn a lesson. I'm never
That's
going to
an
let you go."
expensive one.
and it reinforced with me that there was more than just the day-to-day business. It was about helping me really understand how to be more effective in my role, and some of those mistakes I would never repeat them again, right? So I think this idea of this cycling idea, we kept going back to kind of alignment and trust, recognizing we're part of a broader team. They're all kind of principles that get back and support each other.
This is great. Peter, just a quick rapid fire now round of questions. One Shingo
Okay.
principle you think is most misunderstood? As we spoke about a lot of principles so far, which one is misunderstood by organizations?
Off the top of my head, how about lead with humility? Many think leading with humility means being soft, but it's really more about being open and curious and willing to learn from everyone. Yeah.
Great. Your favorite cycling moment, is it race or ride?
It would definitely be ride. And just a quick one on this one. I love the ride itself. With road biking, so I've shifted a bit from road biking. I don't road bike much anymore. I do mountain bike a lot, and I find that with road biking, I was focused on how many miles did I do, how fast did I do it. But on mountain biking, I find that it's completely, almost 100% about the journey. Did I clear that obstacle I couldn't clear before? Did I really feel good going around the corner? I smell the roses more. I just enjoy the journey. So I think it's, enjoy the journey. Get on a bike.
That's great. You remind me every time I ask my son how was the ride when he's riding alone, not racing. He says, fun, fun, fun. So that's really, I think there's a joy in it.
Gotta enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. One thing you wish more leaders understood about excellence?
We've hit it a little bit, but organizational excellence is not a destination. Even though we have a Shingo Prize, we really try to emphasize that is a recognition that you're doing well on the journey. It's a journey. It should be never ending. You should constantly, I think Simon Sinek talks about it as the infinite game. Make sure you're playing that long game. I was at a plant last week really quick, and they were introducing a new product. That product had to cut the cycle time in half in order for it to be competitive. It was going to be really tough. They had made products forever, and it took typically the same amount of labor hours to complete it. They needed this one in order to, it had to be half those labor hours. So there's all kinds of things they were doing. The challenge was, as we walked around the site, they had little visual boards up around, and the visual board would have a place for the broom and the mop and the dustpan and everything to be sitting there. And guess what? Nothing was where it was supposed to be. And as we walked by it, we noticed that things were pretty dirty, and there was a lot of mess everywhere. And then there was a broom sitting on top of the shelf over here. It wasn't going where it was. And so we go through this, and the CEOs really wanted to dive into the details of how, give us some ideas. What can we do to really cut our cycle time in half? And I said, look, I'll be completely honest with you. We walked by that shadow board for the last 3 days, and never once was anything done. This pile of garbage is still there. It's been there. If you cannot do the simple, easy things, you're not going to be able to cut your cycle time in half. So the answer I'm going to give you is take care of basics first. And I know it doesn't sound sexy, and it's not what your board wants to hear, but if you can't do that, you're going to be really, really frustrated trying to do something really hard.
Absolutely. And it's always important. The foundation is very important, right? So, Peter, if the Peloton had a motto for business, what would it be?
Boy, maybe what we were just saying. I'd say it's if it was for me, it'd be play the long game. It's a 21-day race, right? Play the long game, the infinite game, and enjoy the ride.
Great. Peter, I've really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you very much. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it too. Before we wrap up, I just have one question for you. I hear a lot about self-awareness, right? So what does this mean to you? And it's about leading with humility somehow, but
Yeah,
what does it mean to you?
self-awareness to me is hard. I think it's something that I have had the benefit. So it's kind of an interesting answer, right? So for me to become more self-aware, I can think back to several instances in my life where someone pointed something out that I didn't realize was happening. Them pointing it out then changed my ability to be more aware of how I was coming across. I sometimes have, you may not believe it, but I sometimes have the challenge of getting super excited about things such that I can kind of almost take over and steamroll a session because I get so passionate about it. I'm like, oh, this is so
That's
fun.
cool.
It's good, but I miss the fact that there are several people in the room that are still struggling and it feels like they're being steamrolled. And I've had feedback. And so it's forced me to step back and realize that I have that tendency to just really get excited. And I realized I needed to bring the room along. So self-awareness for me was recognizing where you have weaknesses. And that takes a lot of others to help you. But when you have that, I can now try to reflect and realize that most of what we do in an organization or in a peloton for that matter is not about me, it's about we. And how do I bring those organizations along or those leaders along or team or whoever I'm working with along, and I need to be less worried about my own passion and excitement and trying to really listen and understand others. So for me it's this balance of great feedback, wanting it, listening to it, taking it to heart, and then being able to think about how I need to change my way. So for me, it's trying to get better, but I don't know that I have a perfect mirror yet.
No, this is great. And just you reminded me of a funny story, quick one from my side. In one interview, I was talking, and you're supposed to be saying I in an interview, and I was talking about the we all the time, and the lady asked me, who we? And I said it became really, and that was a moment for me also, like it's part of what we do all the time, talking about we, but at a certain point we need to maybe distance a little bit and say I, but I totally agree with you that the culture of
Yep.
excellence is really about the team, is about we. So, Peter,
Yeah.
thank you very much for this energizing conversation. I love how our shared passion for cycling connects so deeply with the work we do around excellence. Where can our listeners follow your work or connect with you, Peter?
Yeah, that's great. So reach out on LinkedIn. Peter Barnett, you'll find me out there. And I would also encourage you to go to the Shingo website, shingo.org. There's so many
Awesome.
great resources, and a lot of what I was talking about has been heavily influenced by that model. And in there, you'll find me there also.
Great. So, to our listeners, this was Peter Barnett, Riding Toward Excellence, Culture, Speed, and Team Dynamics. Peter, I've learned a lot about your cyclist view on organizational flow and the Shingo model. Thank you again. And to all our listeners, whether you're leading a team or climbing a hill, success is all about alignment, purpose, and the people you ride with. Enjoy the ride and see you next time on the Excellence Foresight. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Nancy. Take care.